Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel, where I recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, and today's the 6th of January, 2022. Alright everyone, let's get into it. So, I put out a tweet last night that I had kind of been thinking about lately, over the last few weeks really, and I kind of just put this out there, wanted to get other people's opinions on it, but I basically said, you either die a Degen or live long enough to see yourself become a crypto boomer. And then I followed up this tweet by saying, I wasn't subtweeting anyone with this, just something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. I was a pretty big Degen in Ethereum DeFi summer, which was most of 2020, but these days I feel like a boomer because I mostly just stack ETH plus do some angel investments. Don't lose your Degen, kids. So I think the reason why I kind of put this out was because I've been feeling like, because I'm not doing the Degen stuff, I'm missing out on a lot of what's going on right now with things like DeFi 2.0, some of the NFT stuff, and, even some of the kind of like DAO stuff that's been going on. So when it comes to the DeFi 2.0 stuff, a lot of it is pretty speculative, right? A lot of it's very risk on. A lot of it, captures people through the, high APYs and stuff like that. And that reminds me of DeFi Summer for sure. But these days, those kind of things just don't appeal to me. I love the innovation coming out of DeFi 2.0, or whatever people are calling it these days. There's some really cool ideas there. But degenning in or aping into random like farms and risking a lot of my money just doesn't appeal to me these days. And that's just because I'm in a different position to what I was in DeFi of 2020. And there's plenty of newer people that are in the position I was back in 2020, which is kind of like funny when you look at it, how quickly this industry moves. Is that DeFi summer started in June of 2020? It's not even 2 years ago. And kind of like I'm at a point now where I just don't really feel the need to do that stuff anymore. But this leads to me missing things. Like I'm sure that you guys will have noticed that I don't, I tend to cover what I can, but there's still a lot of things that I miss these days. And I mean, it's one of two reasons I miss. I miss it because I just don't think it's important enough to cover on the refuel, or I miss it because I'm just not paying attention to those sorts of things these days. And the perfect example of this is the things in the DeFi 2.0 ecosystem, where there's a lot going on there. I'm sure a lot of you guys recently saw the drama between Daniel Sesta and the Bankless guys around, I guess, like the Bankless guys not knowing who he was and knowing the projects like Abracadabra and stuff like that. I was sympathizing with the Bankless guys in that fact that, like, I understood why they didn't know of this, because they're in kind of like a similar position to where I am, whereas I think that they, basically did all their, DJing stuff in 2020, and now they just kind of like turned a little bit into crypto boomers, and that sort of stuff. Those other projects like Abracadabra, I think there's Time and Ice and stuff like that is just things that we just don't pay much attention to, and especially because these things aren't majority on ETH either. I know they are on ETH, but they're also kind of like multi-chain projects on Avalanche and Phantom, I believe. So another reason why, I personally don't pay too much close attention to it there. But that's not to say that they're not good projects and that they're bad projects or anything like that. But it's just funny to see how I caught myself over the last few weeks at least, realizing that, yes, I'm aware of these projects. Yes, I know how they work. I know what innovations they're bringing to the table, but I don't follow them very closely. And to be fair, I don't really follow, any one project super closely. I mean, the project that I follow the closest is Ethereum itself. Obviously, all the stuff going on there with core protocol work and layer 2s, which I consider as part of the core protocol work, to be honest. But at the application layer, it's just become such a thing where there's so many applications now, and it's kind of hard to know what to pay attention to, because there are actually a lot of projects that people kind of like get feverish about that it's just straight up Ponzi's and that actually will collapse. I'm not talking about the things that people think are Ponzi's but aren't really. I'm talking about the actual things that people know are Ponzi's. They're playing them because they want to make money off of them. But those sorts of things, I have no issue with, but it's just not something that I'm going to personally be paying attention to. And that's why, I kind of feel like a crypto boomer these days, because that's something I would have paid attention to back maybe 18 months ago or something like that. And I know a lot of you guys get involved with this stuff as well. Like I see it in the Discord channel, you guys discussing this stuff. It's actually one of the reasons why I can even keep up with it, to be honest, because I read through the channel, see what people are talking about and things like that. So I'm glad that, at least I have that. But just generally, it's just not something that I'm paying too close of attention to lately. So and that's why I said, like, don't lose your Degen, because if you do, you can kind of like lose your edge, right? It depends on what you want to do as well. Like, are you trying to make like an outsized return? Are you trying to turn a few $1,000s into, 6 figures, 7 figures or something like that? Or are you just cruising along because you've made, the money that you wanted to make from it, and you're basically just cruising along doing the less Degen stuff? And to be fair, the Degen stuff is pretty risky, right? It requires like a lot of risk taking. It requires kind of like that mindset of, okay, well, I'm taking a lot of risk here, but the reward's really high, and if I lose, what I'm putting into it, whether it be like a few $1,000s or something like that, I'm fine with losing that. Whereas when you get to a stage where you've kind of like accumulated some wealth, you kind of like turn over into wealth preservation mode, where you're like, okay, maybe I'll degen a little bit on the side if I can be bothered with like a small part of my stack, but for most of my stack, I just want to keep in safer kind of like assets. I don't want to I want to keep it in safer protocols. I don't want to do anything too crazy with it. And people take profits as well, whether it be into stable coins or fiat or anything like that. They cash out, they go buy a house or something like that. So there are just different risk profiles depending on where you are in kind of like the on the wealth ladder, essentially. And I felt all that, right? Like I started where a lot of you guys are probably starting from these days. I only started with a few $1,000s in crypto back in the day, and I grew that to a point where I was pretty happy with it. And then I just completely stopped doing all the degen stuff. I mean, I don't even use any of the protocols outside of testing them out. Like obviously, if they're on Ethereum layer 1, testing them out becomes a bit cost prohibitive because the fees are so high. But I have tested out a lot of the stuff on layer 2, a lot of the unique layer 2 applications that are on both Arbitrum and Optimism, and obviously the stuff that's on the Polygon POS chain, things like that. But I'm not kind of like doing what I used to do in 2020. So I think that I do think it's inevitable that most people end up in that position, and it's totally fine. There are people out there who, for them earning more and more money is just like a scoreboard. Like the money itself doesn't matter. It's kind of like getting a high score. Like they could have $10 million and they could probably say to themselves, wow, okay, $10 million, I don't need to ever work again. Like this is, I could cash out everything right now, buy myself a really nice house and just do whatever I want for the rest of my life. But for some people, it's kind of like, okay, well, I have 10 million. Why not 100 million? Let's see if I can get to 1 billion, right? There are people out there. There's plenty of people out there that want to do that, but it just depends on the type of person that you are. And it depends what you got into this industry for to begin with too. Like if you're more interested in the tech, then you're probably going to be less interested in just like chasing all these kind of like all these trading opportunities and speculating all the time. But if you're interested in just solely making money, well, I mean, that is your kind of like day job, right? Your day job is to keep making as much money as possible for whatever reason. Like personally, I don't see the point in maximizing and min-maxing everything just to make as much money as possible just for a high score. Like for me, I mean, you want to make money to be able to kind of like sustain yourself throughout life and to obviously spend it to buy nicer things for yourself. But I never looked at it as a kind of like high score. And that's why, I'm a crypto boomer now, right? But I think that you can still keep your kind of like degen side in that you can pay attention to the projects that maybe you don't, partake in or speculate in, but you pay attention to the innovations that they're bringing to the table and the cool stuff that they're doing. But again, as time goes on, there's more and more projects that are going to come out. It's going to become pretty much impossible for any one person to keep up with the Ethereum ecosystem, let alone the crypto ecosystem as a whole. And we really shouldn't shame people for that. I don't agree with shaming people for not knowing who someone is or what something is, even if they're heavily involved in one part of the ecosystem. Because I can tell you right now, there's a lot of people within this ecosystem that don't know anything about things that you think are kind of like really, really well known. For example, like I get surprised sometimes because I talk to people and they're like, "Oh, I didn't hear of this." I'm like, "Wow, okay." In my head, I'm like, "How did they not hear of this?" Like I'd seen this everywhere. And the reality is that a lot of people don't spend every waking moment on Twitter. They don't spend every waking moment on Reddit and watching YouTube, watching the Refuel, things like that. They're just casual observers. They enjoy, crypto. They kind of get the vision. They're casual investors, but they're not sitting there all day, every day, which most people aren't doing that. Like there's only a few people that do that, sit there, and pay attention to everything for one reason or another. Like a lot of the reasons people kind of like sit there and pay attention to everything are monetary because they want to be on the bleeding edge. They want to get, extract that alpha. And, some people just really enjoy it. Like for me personally, the reason I am still so involved with this ecosystem is because it's just my passion. I really, really enjoy it. I'm not trying to extract alpha out of anything. I'm not trying to find the next 100x gem or stuff like that. I want to keep up with everything so I can kind of like pass on this education to everyone else and make sure that they can keep up with everything. But there's plenty of casual observers out there, and there's nothing wrong with that. So just a little bit of a spiel there about, I guess going from a degen to a crypto boomer and how fast it can creep up on you. But it doesn't have to mean that you fall behind. You can still keep up to date with things, but I can tell you like from firsthand experience, you you do reach a point where you're like, okay, well, you get scared of losing what you've accumulated, so you become very risk off and you become very conservative, and that's exactly what the term boomer is supposed to describe. It's not. I use the term boomer to describe like a conservative, very risk off, not wanting anything to change mindset, rather than the generation, because typically, kind of like the older generations are in that mindset anyway, because they're at the kind of like tail end of their lives. They've built up all this stuff over their lives, and they don't want to lose it right at the end, right? So they become conservative. They don't take many risks, and they also want to pass things on to their kids or to their family. So I think it's just a natural thing that as you get older, you become risk averse, but also as your wealth goes up over time, you become more risk averse, and you want to kind of like keep what you've earned instead of risking it all for more gains, because there is a ceiling at some point where you're kind of like, okay, well, this level of wealth is only going to marginally increase my happiness, and it's not actually a very high ceiling, to be honest. There's been studies done on it and things like that. But if your only goal or your main goal is to kind of like accumulate as much money as possible, and it's like a high score for you, then by all means do that. But I think most people don't fall into that bucket. I think most people fall into the bucket that I'm in. But yeah, anyway, I'm gonna leave it at that. I just thought as just kind of like instill some wisdom in you guys about something that I've been thinking a lot about over the last, I guess, month or two. All right, so a really cool new ETH research blog post from Vitalik today titled Multidimensional EIP-1559. So what this basically describes is a way to have different, I guess, like fee markets on Ethereum for different things. So for example, you could have a fee market that's specific to layer 2s because they use call data. This goes back to the EIP-4488 that was proposed a few weeks ago. You could have different fee markets for kind of like DeFi, for NFTs, just for different opcodes essentially. No, you wouldn't, the protocol wouldn't bucket these things into the category of DeFi, NFT, layer 2. The protocol would just know the opcodes that are used, or the operation codes that are used by each solution, and bucket it into its own kind of like fee market. Now, this is just an idea. There was a few bits of back and forth here. One of them brought up kind of like, or a couple of them brought up the complexity of this. I'm going to be honest, this is not something that's probably going to be put into the network anytime soon. I think that obviously the merge is the priority. And then you have sharding after that and a few other things. So I don't know if this is going to be... I mean, I wouldn't put my money on this coming into the network anytime soon, but it's still something interesting to think about, because it goes back to the discussion around EIP 4488, around kind of like lowering the cost of call data so that L2s can have cheaper gas cost on L1. But it also brings up the discussion of, okay, are we playing favorites by doing this, right? Like, are we kind of like saying, okay, well, if call data is cheaper, then doing something else, like something within DeFi, does that play favorites towards layer 2? I think that becomes kind of like an ecosystem-wide thing where we have to basically come to kind of like an agreement as an ecosystem on what we value out of the Ethereum network. Do we value it providing more space for layer 2s? Do we value it providing more space for DeFi, for NFTs, all that sort of stuff? And personally, I think that we should be valuing Ethereum's layer 1 block space for L2s, because as I've said before, and kind of like the path and the roadmap to getting to a certain point is to basically get to a point where layer 1 is really only for layer 2s to be kind of verifying themselves on and posting their data to and all that sort of stuff there. So from that perspective, we should really make it so that layer 1 Ethereum is favoring L2s, and that's exactly what EIP 4488 tried to do and will do if it goes through like after the merge and things like that. But I think it's more of I wouldn't say moral question, but more of a kind of like subjective thing. It's definitely not an objective thing. You can't say, okay, well, layer 2s are objectively more important than DeFi. I mean, I personally think that they are, but objectivity is a funny thing, because there's other people who would say, well, no, DeFi is more important because the DeFi activity on Ethereum, at least for the foreseeable future, is generating most of the fee revenue, which is burning, the most ETH, which is sending value to ETH as an asset, which is securing the network, right? You could make an argument kind of like either way. So being objective about this sort of stuff is incredibly difficult, and I don't believe there's actually an objective answer to this. As I said, I personally believe that we should be optimizing L1 for L2, which we are doing, but I think that we should be doing it quicker than what we are, and I believe that we should be getting as much people to migrate off and to layer 2s as possible. But that's going to be a slower kind of like burn there, slower process. This multidimensional 1559 upgrade may go in before we get to even kind of like 20-30% of usage of layer 2s of layer 1 block space. So yeah, but anyway, you can give this little research post a read here and read the back and forth. It's pretty interesting. I thought it was a great thing just to kind of like discuss with you guys today. And if you're interested in commenting, you can. I always love the ETH research kind of forum here because anyone can comment. Like fellow Daily Gwei community member Domothy actually commented here, which I kind of like saw. I was like, oh, wow, that's really cool. And kind of like asked a few questions. And the amazing thing is like Vitalik replies, right? Like you're literally able to converse with Vitalik, the founder of Ethereum, on this research kind of like post here. And he'll reply to you just like anyone else. And I've always admired that about Vitalik, but especially about this industry where you can essentially talk to any of the heavy hitters as long as you meet them in the right kind of like forum. So that was really cool as well. But anyway, definitely go give this a read. I'll link it in the YouTube description for you guys. So Justin Drake announced today that the Ethereum Foundation research team will host a Reddit AMA on Jan 7th at 1 p.m. UTC. So that's tomorrow, I believe. I don't know what the current UTC time is, but yeah, at 1 p.m. UTC, Jan 7th, and you can ask your questions right now. So I'll link this Reddit thread in the YouTube description. You can go ask your questions in here. But essentially, these are always really great. You can basically ask, the people who are at the forefront of Ethereum, kind of like research and development, anything about Ethereum. I already see people like Rosist, who is Polynia, for those who don't know, in here, as a few other kind of like people already asking questions. Just going down the list here to see anyone else that I kind of like that I kind of recognize, but I'm not really frequent on Reddit, so apologies to anyone watching this and you see your name on there and I don't recognize you, but definitely go get your questions in before the AMA happens. Obviously, you can ask it during the AMA, but these are always amazing. I love reading through them. There's so much kind of like alpha packed into these. I guess like alpha being kind of like Ethereum core protocol development alpha rather than kind of like alpha for investing. So yeah, if you're in it for the tech, this is definitely one that you want to read, so definitely go check that out. And speaking of core Ethereum development, Geth version 1.10.15 is out, which contains a few important bug fixes. So if you are running a Geth client or full node here, definitely go give this release a download and install and upgrade your full node here. So another great thread from Pseudotheos today, hopefully I'm saying that right, mate, about data availability. So this thread goes through what data availability is, why it's important for blockchains as well. So you can see it's not too long of a thread here. It's got links to more information here. But, I've talked about data availability a lot on the Refuel before and how it's kind of like one of the core pillars of the modular roadmap and why it's so important. So Pseudotheos just put together a really nice thread here going over in more detail about it with the links to a few different things. It's funny because like people may be thinking, maybe not on the Refuel, but like in general, you may be thinking, everyone's heard of the modular stack these days. Everyone's heard of data availability and settlement and execution. It's all well and good. But if you pay attention to, I guess, like what the wider crypto ecosystem knows about Ethereum scaling roadmap, it's very, very little. And I actually saw recently that Vitalik went on Bankless and he said a few things on there that I think, in the spur of the moment, you tend to say things that may not be like totally accurate or may not be kind of like, totally in line with what Ethereum's kind of like doing and maybe taken out of context as well. And I've seen so many people kind of like take things out of context and add no nuance to it. For example, Vitalik, I think, said something like if ETH 2.0 or kind of like the Ethereum roadmap is 50% done or 50% of the way to completion. Now, when you kind of like look at that as in a vacuum without nuance, it seems very kind of like weird. You may think to yourself, it's been all these years and ETH 2 is only 50% done. But the reality is that ETH 2 is not really a thing, right? It's just the Ethereum roadmap. ETH 2 as nomenclature has kind of like been retired in favor of just like the general Ethereum roadmap. And the general Ethereum roadmap, we could be 50% done with it because we keep adding things to it. It could even be 30% done because we're going to add things in the future. But I think the right way to look at Ethereum is that it is never going to be finished. It is a constantly evolving protocol. I don't think that it's ever going to ossify completely where no changes can happen at the protocol layer. I think that changes will become slower and slower over time, and we may get to a point where a change only goes into Ethereum once every 5 years or once every 10 years or something, later down the line. But that still means Ethereum is never quote unquote finished, right? Because there's always things that we want to add to it. But in terms of like the core things over the next, say, 3-ish years, they're the major things, right? You got the merge, of course, you have sharding, you have statelessness, you have hopefully snarkifying a layer 1, things like that. And, a bunch of other things like state expiry, all that sort of stuff there. That's all part of the nearish term roadmap, and I would actually argue that gets us to basically 90% completion, and then the remaining 10% are a lot of nice to haves out there, and maybe other critical things like quantum resistance and stuff like that. I've seen people talk about that lately as well. But that's what I mean by just citing something like, oh, Vitalik said that, ETH2 is only 50% complete. It just lacks complete nuance. But this is what most people see. This is what the mainstream sees. And this is what I try so hard to fight against, this bad information. Now, not to say that Vitalik comes up with this bad information, but what ends up happening is that anything he says gets twisted by the mainstream media because they do clickbait headlines, or by people kind of like just doing Chinese whispers and essentially mumbling up what was exactly said. And on the internet, it's just so bad because it takes, much more effort to refute bullshit than it does to spread it. That's one thing I've become acutely aware of over the years, fighting all of this FUD. So I think that continuously putting out this information, even if you think that everyone already knows kind of like what it is and you think that's old information, I don't think it is. I think that continuously putting it out is a huge net positive. I think that continuously kind of like harping on about the modular blockchain design, what Ethereum's roadmap looks like, why the ETH2 nomenclature doesn't actually make much sense these days, and especially kind of educating people on the fact that the merge isn't going to substantially reduce gas fees at all. I mean, there might be a slight decrease because of the faster block times, but I doubt it's going to be noticeable. Things like that, right? Because there's so much bad information that just gets spread around, either kind of like willingly or unwillingly by people, and I think that we should always aim to correct that. And Pseudotheos is one person that has been doing this a lot lately through their Twitter threads, so I'm really, really glad to see that. Obviously, Polynar did a bunch of it as well. I've done it in the past. I don't do that many Twitter threads these days, but obviously I do it through the newsletter and the Refuel. There's been other people like Domothy as well, and a few others out there. I think Max Invest, just calling out random names here that I can remember right now. And I think it's a really great way to grow a Twitter following too. If you want to grow a Twitter following, putting out educational threads like this is definitely a good way to do it too. So yeah, don't be afraid to kind of like repeat things that you think that everyone knows, because more often than not, most people don't know it, and it just may feel like they do because because Twitter's algorithms are showing you kind of like the people that are aware of these things, not the people that aren't aware of these things. And trust me, there are a lot of people who aren't aware of these things. All right, moving on. So Austin Griffith put together a really nice thread today on your Web3 developer next steps. So if you've done the scaffold.eth challenges that I mentioned the other day from Austin here, you understand how to build a simple NFT, a staking app, and a token vendor. So you're ready for the rest of the mental model. And this thread goes through the Web3 developer next steps. So there's a lot of links here. A lot of great stuff, a lot of tutorials. I mean, heaps. Like, look at this. I'm scrolling down this thread right now. It's kind of like never ending, right? And Austin Griffith built a lot of great stuff. He's a great teacher, great mentor. Really, really, really cares about kind of upskilling builders to kind of get onboarded with Web3 and with Ethereum development. So if that's you and you're interested in this sort of stuff, definitely go check out this thread. It'll be linked in the YouTube description. I would say this is probably one of the fastest ways to get up to speed with Web3 development. So if you're trying to, I guess, like upskill in order to get a job as a developer within the Web3 Ethereum crypto ecosystems, this is probably one of the best places to do that. So definitely go check this out. It'll be linked in the YouTube description below. So a resource I came across today was this resource from Natalia, who she says she spent the past few weeks learning about StarkWare and put together a document compiling the best resources. Now, I thought this is really cool because you can see here, this document is very comprehensive. Like, you just basically expand these things, and you can kind of see all the links to different kind of like things like libraries and tools, fees on the alpha of StarkNet, comparisons between rollups, community calls, Twitter accounts to follow, and then you have like a bunch of podcast features to listen to from StarkWare, and then stuff on Cairo, which is their native language, upcoming events, and as I said, you can expand all this stuff for more info here. So this is really cool. I'd love to see this be done for like basically everything, not just StarkWare, obviously like Optimism, Arbitrum, Polygon, all the L2s, but also all the projects. I really, there really isn't kind of like a one-stop repository for everything. There are some attempts at it. I know Masari's has been doing a lot of work here. It's kind of like creating a one-stop shop for a lot of projects and stuff like that. But I think that when it comes to having like a bunch of resources that available for people, there could be more work done here. So this may be like a project that you guys can focus on as well. If you're trying to make a name for yourself within the industry, as I said, one of the best ways is through, I think, educational threads on Twitter. That's a really great way. And even on Reddit as well, doing the educational posts there. But putting together resources and sharing them with people is another good way. And, you know, that's how actually I got my start. I used to run a website, I think it should still be alive, called blockbyblock.io, which was just a website with a list of resources. Like, it had links to all these different resources within the crypto ecosystem. A lot of them these days, if the website is still live, a lot of them are outdated these days. But that's how I got my start. And the ETHUB newsletter used to be called the Block by Block newsletter. And all I did was kind of like continue doing that. I had like barely any subscribers, like 50 to 100 subscribers for the longest time. I kept doing Twitter threads, kept sharing my site, kept linking people to resources, kept educating. And that was how I got my start. So I think it's just the probably still the best way to get your start, because so many people are hungry to learn. So many people are hungry to kind of like have things broken down for them into really easy to digest things. They want links to more resources. They want to go deeper down the rabbit hole. And if you're more experienced, then doing that is a net positive in both ways, because you get to educate people, but you also get to grow your own following, which comes with a lot of kind of like benefits as well. I mean, you know, I have people always asking me about like how do I get, you know, how I get like invited to invest in early stage companies and stuff like that, and how I get early access to things. Really, at the end of the day, it's got to do with the fact that, like, you know, I built myself up and built my name up within the ecosystem, and got to a point where, you know, I can add value to projects. I can help them with marketing, community stuff, and kind of like help them with feedback on things. So that's a pretty good way to get to that point as well. So definitely, I guess, like, keep that in mind when growing your own profile. I know I've seen a few people want to do this, and they've asked me for advice on how to grow their profiles and things like that. And that really is the best way to do it. It is more competitive these days than it was back when I was doing it, because there's a lot more people in the ecosystem. But at the same time, it means that there's a lot more people to kind of like follow you too. Like, I remember my following was very small. Like, it was probably under 10,000 or even under 5,000 for the longest time, like well into 2019, I believe, or even in 2020. And then it exploded from there because a lot more people came into the ecosystem. But for a long time, there wasn't very much of us around. Like, doesn't matter if it was a bull or a bear market, there wasn't very much of us around. But these days, bull or bear, there's plenty of people around. There's plenty of things to do, plenty of things to cover, plenty of things to talk about. Even if the market is going down like it is today, right? There's still plenty of stuff to talk about. So yeah, and plenty of stuff to educate about as well there. But I think on that note, that's going to be it for today. I know I'm a bit short on time today, but as I said, guys, I don't expect much to be happening until probably next week or the week after. People are still on holiday, still enjoying their break, but I'm sure that we're still in store for a big Q1 as we go forward through January, February, and March. But on that note, going to end it there. So thank you everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give that video a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all next week. Thanks everyone. Oh, not next week, tomorrow. Thanks everyone.